Hey guys, Gary with Door Closers USA. Today's video is going to cover how to replace offset pivot hinge on a storefront, commercial storefront glass door. So this is probably the most common type of hinge system on a storefront door, and I'm sure you guys have come across this because they are surface mounted. So here you can see we have the top upper portion of the offset pivot. So this piece right here actually has a spring-loaded pin that's going into a bushing on this frame portion. So it's actually two pieces here. And then down here, we also have the bottom pivot hinge, which depending on the model you have, the bottom frame portion, typically it's mounted onto inside of the frame, and then the threshold also mounts on the bottom portion of the pivot. And then this piece here is the door portion, and it has a bearing in it to where the pin on this is actually pivoting inside of that bearing. And I'll show all this to you guys once we remove it. But a common situation is, you come out to the job and maybe the wind caught the door, and it's very common for these things to snap off if the wind catches it. So that's a pretty common thing where one portion will be broken or something like that. Another common thing is sometimes the installer doesn't put support beneath this frame portion. Here we have a 2x6, but in a real world installation, you're gonna want, the surface of the ground or something supporting that. If this frame portion is just hanging off, hanging in the air, supporting all the weight, they commonly shear off. Same thing when people tend to hang the doors. When I'm going to hang the door, if I'm just resting all the weight on that frame portion, it could snap it off. So those are just kind of some things to look at. But although these, if you ask anybody, they'll say, oh yeah, I have that storefront glass door, I have that commercial glass door. To the normal person, all these doors look identical. And just looking at it, you'd say, oh, well, all these pivot hinges are identical as well. Well, that is not the case. So if you're needing a replacement pivot hinge, the first thing I would do is quickly identify what model of door this is. Typically, the brand of the door will be listed at the bottom rail in the center or on the side right here. If you have an older door, it may not be listed. At that point, your best option would be, sometimes you can get lucky if you look at the lock cylinder or the faceplate. Sometimes the manufacturer will brand those. In this case, it's not, but that's one way you could figure out. Common brands include, Conair, Vistawall, Tube Light, Amaralite, things of that nature. But in the event you do not know what type of pivot hinge you have because there is no door model, the next best thing would be to do this. So what we're looking at is the pivot hinges come in a set, bottom and top. So what you want to actually do is match up the screw hole pattern. And this is a new installation, so everything's clean. But you may have to scrape dirt and different things out of the threshold so you can see. So what I'm looking at here is I have two screw holes here, and that's mounting the actual threshold to the pivot hinge frame portion. So I can see I have two mounting holes here for the pivot hinge and then two up here. So looking at that hole pattern, I can identify which model pivot hinge I would require, because different models have different hinge patterns or hole patterns. So there's two on the threshold and then two in the jamb. And then if I look up, I could see how the upper frame portion is mounted. I have sort of a triangle with three mounting holes. Some hinges only have two. So between those two screw patterns, you can typically identify which model you have. Now, if you have any questions at all, basically send us those photos and we can match it up for you. It's not a big deal. We do it all the time, so it's like second nature for us. So that's quickly kind of like how you can identify which pivot hinge you need for replacement. They do come in a set, comes with the bottom and the top. So now what I'm gonna do, guys, is I'll go over one more option with them. So the obvious option is storefront doors come in clear anodized like this or dark bronze anodized. So as you can imagine, these pivot hinges are available in those two colors as well. But another thing that you have to consider is on some door models, you can see on this door model, if the door is shut, you can see the door sets into the frame slightly. See that gap? If you run your hand, if you were to run your hand across here, you could feel that it steps down a little. So this is actually what we call a 1/8 inch recess door model. Some storefront doors are what we call flush, meaning the door itself is completely flush with the frame. There is no drop. There is no step right here. So that's the other option you need to consider when purchasing the pivot hinge, because a lot of these pivot hinges are offered in two formats, a 1/8 inch recess or a flush. And you want to make sure you choose the correct one so that your door will sit in the right location. If it doesn't, what's going to happen is you may have to adjust your strike hole out a little bit or in, so to speak. So that's why you want to make sure you have the correct pivot hinge to set it in the exact same spot as it originally was. So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and remove these pivot hinges so you guys can see exactly how you would replace them. It's actually quite simple. So what I'm going to do for this installation is some pivot hinges, if you look down in the top rail, I'll show you guys here. So there are just two bolts here. When you replace these pivot hinges, you're going to want to remove the door. Now sometimes there's a pin here so that you can depress it and it'll pull the pin down. Okay, that's not the case in this one. So for this installation, or for this removal, what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to carefully remove those 3 frame screws right there to pop out the frame portion, and then the top will pop out. In the event you're not able to get to these 3 screws, or maybe you have 2 screws, in the event you're not able to get to these frame screws, you know, for whatever reason, some doors, with how it's swung or with how the door swings, it's just not possible. So another option too, if you're not able to do that and you need to remove the door and replace the pivot hinge, is you could actually take a drill and drill straight through here. Once you drill all the way through here, the drill bit will press on the pin of this door portion, and then you could use the drill bit to push it all the way down this pin, and then the door will pop out. So that's an option if you're not able to get to the frame screws. But for this case, I'm able to, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. This one out. Now on the last one, guys, we gotta be very careful because this piece is gonna slide out. You don't want it falling on your head. So I'm gonna try to hold the door and keep it in, and then we could remove it slowly. Okay, got that. Okay, so now the door will remove. I'm gonna come over here. It's gonna pop out. Okay. And here it comes. I'm removing it now, pulling it out. And then there it is right there. And I gotta be careful not to, I don't want to put all the weight of the door on that bottom pivot. So I'll set this door aside on the table so we can see. But here's that pin portion. There it is. Okay, I'm gonna set this down on the table, guys, so we can look at the pivots. So we just removed the door. Now this is where we actually can do the pivot replacement here. Let's go take a look though to see how everything functions. So here was the top pivot with the spring-loaded pin. In the event we are replacing this, because the kit does come with all new door portion and frame portion of the pivot set, you could see that there's just some bolts right here. All you need to do is take a wrench and remove those 2 bolts, and then this comes off. Pretty simple. Same thing with the bottom portion. So let's look at the bottom portion, or the non-pin portion. As you can see here, here's that bearing, and that's what the pin was sitting in. So again, to replace this, all we're gonna do is remove those 2 bolts there and then bolt on the new pieces. Okay, and then over here, guys, so here was the threshold frame portion. You can see the pin right there. There's an adjuster right here, a set screw. So you can raise or lower this and then tighten that down for adjustment. But yeah, so here, I'll show you guys, we'll remove this as well. And then we can replace that. And then if you look up, obviously that's where the top frame portion goes. It just slides right in there, and then we'll bolt in the new one. Okay guys, let's go ahead and do that. Okay guys, I got the door here on the table as well. And as you can see, this is the outside of the door. You can see the pull handle there. So the hinges are on the left side, which means that this would be considered a right-hand door. So a lot of these pivot hinges are handed, and I have a couple here. So here's the door portion upper with the spring. And then here's the door portion lower. There it is. And then of course it comes with all the mounting hardware. And then here would be the bottom pin. So here it is here with the adjustment. And then you can see, so that here we go. 2 holes in the bottom, 2 holes in the top, and it's also stamped right hand, which is what we need. And then here is the upper frame portion. So if we go over to the door, let me go ahead and show you guys. This is why it's important to know the door make and model. That's going to be your first step to sourcing the correct hinge from us. If not, like I said, just send us pictures of this hole pattern here and then the upper hole pattern here. But basically here you can see we have the 2 threshold mounting screws that are going in the pivot, and then we have the 2 that are kind of perpendicular to this going into the jamb.